I'm Daniel, 32 years old, and last month I found myself sitting at a table that cost more than my first car. Why? My mother's 60th birthday dinner at Bellissimo, the fanciest restaurant in town. After 10 years away building my life in tech, I'd returned home hoping things had changed. They hadn't. As my sister Jessica's twin daughters complained about their untouched $65 pasta dishes, I realized some family dynamics never evolve. What happened next would finally break a lifetime pattern of inequality. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted. Growing up, it was just my mother, my older sister Jessica, and me in a small 3-bedroom house on the edge of a decent neighborhood. My father left when I was 4, and my memories of him are just fragments: a deep laugh, the smell of motor oil, and the sound of the front door closing for the last time. His departure created a void in our family that somehow twisted the dynamics in ways I wouldn't understand until much later. From early childhood, it was clear that Jessica held a special place in my mother's heart. Maybe it was because she looked so much like my father. Same hazel eyes, same dimpled smile. Or maybe it was because she was the first child. Whatever the reason, the favoritism was undeniable and consistent throughout our childhood. When Jessica needed new clothes for school, my mother would take her shopping at the mall. When I outgrew my jeans, I'd find a plastic bag from Goodwill on my bed. When Jessica wanted to join cheerleading, my mother found the money for uniforms and camp. When I wanted to join the science club, I was told to find a way to pay for it myself. Jessica is more sensitive. My mother would explain when I questioned the difference in treatment. She needs more support. You're so independent, Daniel. You can handle things. And so I did handle things. By 14, I was mowing lawns and shoveling driveways to buy my own school supplies. By 16, I was working 20 hours a week at a local grocery store while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Jessica, meanwhile, barely passed her classes and spent most weekends at parties that my mother pretended not to know about. College was the clearest example of the divide between us. I received exactly $0 toward my education. I worked multiple jobs, applied for every scholarship possible, and graduated with student loans that took me 7 years to pay off. Jessica, on the other hand, had her tuition paid for at a private college, only to drop out after 3 semesters when she met Thomas, her now husband. Thomas came from money, old money with a capital M. His family owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states, and he'd never known a day of financial worry in his life. Jessica was dazzled by his wealth, and within a year of meeting, they were married in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. To my mother, Thomas was the ultimate catch. He represented everything she had wanted but never achieved: financial security, social status, and the kind of lifestyle she'd only seen in magazines. The fact that Thomas treated service workers like they were beneath him, or that he made casually racist comments at family gatherings, was apparently irrelevant. He had money, and in my mother's world, that was what mattered most. Meanwhile, I was building my own success story. After graduating with a computer science degree, I landed a job at a startup that eventually went public. I moved up the ranks quickly, known for both technical expertise and the ability to manage teams effectively. I lived well below my means, invested wisely, and by 30, had amassed the kind of financial security that most people work their entire lives to achieve. But I never flaunted my success, partly because it wasn't my style, and partly because I knew my family would immediately see me as a resource rather than a person. Jessica and Thomas had twin daughters when they were 26, Lily and Zoe. The girls were cute, bright, and utterly spoiled. From birth, they were given everything they pointed at. Want the newest iPhone? Done. Designer clothes for elementary school? Of course. Extravagant birthday parties with pony rides and professional photographers? Absolutely necessary. I tried to be a good uncle despite living across the country. I'd send thoughtful birthday and Christmas gifts, books about science and space, craft kits, museum memberships. I'd try to video chat with them when I could, but Jessica always found a way to undermine my relationship with her daughters. Uncle Daniel is too busy with his computer job to visit, she'd say within earshot during our calls. Or she'd forget to have the girls write thank you notes for the gifts I sent, while making sure they wrote elaborate cards for Thomas's parents' presents. My mother, predictably, thought Jessica was the world's greatest parent. She's so devoted to those girls, she'd tell me during our monthly phone calls. They're so well-behaved and polite. Jessica is really raising them right. This was despite the fact that every time I saw them, the twins were glued to their tablets, interrupting adult conversations and throwing tantrums when they didn't get their way. But in my mother's eyes, Jessica could do no wrong, and by extension, her parenting was beyond reproach. When my mother turned 59, she had a minor health scare. Nothing serious, but enough to make me reconsider my distance from family. Despite our complicated history, she was still my mother. After much deliberation, I decided to move back to my hometown, buying a modest but comfortable house about 15 minutes from her. I told myself it was to be closer in case of medical emergencies, but part of me still hoped for the maternal connection I'd never really had. Jessica was suspicious of my return from day one. "What happened? Did your fancy job fire you?" she asked the first time I saw her after moving back. "No, I'm still with the same company. I can work remotely now," I explained. "Must be nice to have everything handed to you," she said, apparently blind to the irony of her statement. This was the family dynamic I had returned to, a sister who resented my success despite her own privileged life, a mother who couldn't see the inequality she had created, and me, still trying to earn the approval I knew deep down would never come. Then came my mother's 60th birthday, and the dinner that would finally force me to confront the patterns that had defined our family for decades. When my mother's 60th birthday approached, I saw it as an opportunity to try once more to connect with my family. I called her to suggest dinner at Bellissimo, the most expensive restaurant in town. It was the kind of place with a 3-month waiting list and entrees that started at $40. "That sounds lovely, Daniel," my mother said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Jessica and Thomas should come too, of course." "Of course," I agreed, having expected this. I was thinking just adults, though, a sophisticated evening out. There was a pause on the line. "Well, Jessica won't want to leave the girls. You know how attached they are. And it wouldn't be a proper celebration without my granddaughters." I bit back my objection. 10-year-olds at a restaurant where people proposed marriage and celebrated anniversaries wasn't ideal, but I'd learned long ago that arguing with my mother about Jessica's children was pointless. "Sure, Mom. Whatever will make you happy. It's your birthday." I made the reservation for 6 people, requested the best table they had, and left my credit card on file. When the hostess asked if we were celebrating a special occasion, I explained it was my mother's 60th birthday and asked if they could do something special for dessert. She assured me they would make it memorable. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I spent hours looking for the perfect gift for my mother. I finally found it in a vintage brooch that resembled one her grandmother had owned, one she'd often talked about missing after it was lost during a move when I was a child. I had it professionally cleaned and placed in a velvet box with a handwritten note. On the evening of the dinner, I arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a tailored suit I'd had made during a business trip to New York. The hostess led me to our table, a prime spot near the windows overlooking the river. The table was already set with fine china, crystal glasses, and a small arrangement of my mother's favorite flowers that I had arranged to be delivered. My mother arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. She gave me a quick hug and immediately asked, "Are Jessica and the family here yet?" "Not yet," I said, pulling out her chair. "You look beautiful, Mom. Happy birthday." "Thank you, dear. Jessica helped me pick out this dress. She has such good taste." I nodded and handed her the small gift-wrapped box. "I got you something. I hope you like it." She took it with a distracted smile. "That's sweet. I'll open it later when everyone's here." We sat in awkward silence for several minutes. I attempted conversation about her garden, her book club, my new house, anything to fill the void, but her responses were perfunctory, her eyes constantly darting to the entrance of the restaurant. Finally, 35 minutes after our reservation time, Jessica, Thomas, and the twins arrived in a flurry of noise and motion. Jessica was wearing what appeared to be a new designer dress, while Thomas was in a casual blazer that somehow still looked more expensive than my suit. The twins, Lily and Zoe, were in matching outfits that seemed far too formal for children their age. "Sorry we're late, Mom," Jessica said, bending to kiss our mother's cheek. The girls couldn't decide what to wear, and then Thomas had a work call. "It's fine, sweetheart. You're here now." My mother stood up to embrace her, her face lighting up in a way it hadn't when I arrived. Thomas gave me a cursory nod. "Daniel, still doing the computer thing?" "Software development, yes," I replied, extending my hand, which he shook with the limp grip of someone who's never had to prove himself. Good, good. Someone's got to do the tech support, right?" He laughed at his own joke. I turned my attention to my nieces. "Hi, Lily. Hi, Zoe. It's good to see you both." The girls barely looked up from the iPads they'd brought with them, the volume loud enough that diners at nearby tables were already glancing over with annoyed expressions. "Girls, say hello to your uncle," Jessica prompted half-heartedly. "Hi," they mumbled in unison, eyes still fixed on their screens. As everyone settled into their seats, I noticed my mother had positioned herself between Jessica and the twins, with Thomas on Jessica's other side. This left me alone on the opposite side of the table, physically separated from the family unit they formed. "So, Mom opened her gift from me this morning," Jessica announced, touching our mother's arm. "Show him, Mom." My mother pulled back her sleeve to reveal a thin gold bracelet with a small diamond charm. "Isn't it beautiful?" Jessica and Thomas got it from that jewelry store in the city. "It's lovely," I said sincerely. I glanced at the gift I'd brought, still sitting unopened by her plate. She followed my gaze but made no move to open it. The waiter approached to take our drink orders. My mother and Jessica both ordered white wine. Thomas requested your most expensive bourbon, neat, and I asked for water. When the waiter asked about drinks for the children, Jessica waved her hand. "They'll just have water. They don't like the fancy sodas anyway." I noticed both girls look up at this, their expressions suggesting this wasn't true, but they remained silent. As we reviewed our menus, Lily and Zoe continued to play games on their iPads, the pinging and chiming sounds creating a constant distraction. An elderly couple at the next table was openly frowning now. "Maybe the girls could use headphones?" I suggested gently. "Or turn the volume down a bit?" Jessica shot me an irritated look. "They're fine. They're just playing." "I know, but this is a pretty quiet restaurant. And, Daniel," my mother interrupted, "don't make a fuss. The girls are just entertaining themselves." I nodded and returned to my menu, ignoring the familiar sting of being the only one ever expected to adjust my behavior. Thomas was loudly discussing the wine list with the waiter, making a show of his knowledge. "We'll take a bottle of the Chateau Margaux for the table," he declared, pointing to one of the most expensive options, priced at $300. The waiter glanced at me, clearly identifying me as the host who would be paying. I gave a small nod, even as I calculated the growing cost of the evening in my head. My mother beamed at Thomas. "You always know the best wines." "It's a gift," he replied with false modesty. "Speaking of gifts, Daniel, what exactly do you do at that tech company again? Something with websites?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Daniel does something with computers, but let me tell you what Zoe did at her piano recital last week. She was absolutely brilliant." And just like that, any chance I had to share my recent promotion to Senior Director of Engineering, a role that put me in charge of a 100-person team and a multi-million-dollar budget, was gone, replaced by a detailed account of my niece playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with two hands. I sat silently, watching as my family once again rendered me invisible, wondering why I had thought this time would be any different. The waiter returned with the wine Thomas had selected and went through the formal presentation ritual. Thomas swirled, sniffed, and tasted with exaggerated movements before declaring it acceptable, though I doubted he could tell the difference between this $300 bottle and something a tenth of the price. As the waiter poured wine for the adults, except me, with my water, he asked if we were ready to order. "I'll have the filet mignon, rare," Thomas announced without consulting the menu again. Jessica studied her options carefully. "The lobster risotto sounds amazing." "Get whatever you want, sweetheart," my mother encouraged. Daniel's paying. She said this without looking at me, as though my wallet was a separate entity from my person. I'll have the duck confit, my mother decided, closing her menu definitively. When it was my turn, I started to say, "The salmon looks—" "Mom, shouldn't you try the prime rib?" Jessica interrupted. "You always say you love a good prime rib." My mother immediately reconsidered. "You're right, Jessica. I'll change to the prime rib." The waiter nodded and made the adjustment without comment, then turned to the twins. "And for the young ladies?" Jessica didn't consult her daughters. "They'll both have the truffle pasta. And can you bring extra Parmesan on the side?" I glanced at the menu again. The truffle pasta was $65 per plate, and from the bored expressions on my nieces' faces, I doubted they even knew what truffles were. "Are you sure they'll eat that?" I asked cautiously. "I don't mind taking them somewhere more kid-friendly after this if they'd prefer something simpler." Jessica's face hardened. "They're fine here. They need to learn to appreciate fine dining. I was just thinking they might enjoy." "They're fine," Jessica repeated firmly, cutting me off. "I think it's wonderful that Jessica exposes the girls to sophisticated experiences," my mother added. "When you and Jessica were young, I could never afford to take you to places like this." I bit back the response that rose automatically to my lips, that Jessica had never actually had to work for anything in her life, while I had scraped and sacrificed for every opportunity. Instead, I simply nodded and took a sip of my water. The waiter departed with our orders, and Thomas immediately launched into a story about a recent golf trip with clients. My mother and Jessica listened with rapt attention, laughing at all the right moments, while I sat silently across the table. The twins had returned to their tablets, the volume seemingly even louder than before. I tried again to join the conversation. I actually had some good news I wanted to share. And then, on the 17th hole, Thomas continued as if I hadn't spoken. "This client from Chicago tries to give me advice on my swing." Me, the guy who almost went pro in college. Jessica touched his arm adoringly. "You should have gone pro. You would have been amazing." "Probably," Thomas agreed with complete seriousness. "But then I wouldn't have met you, so it all worked out." My mother sighed happily. "You two are just perfect together." I tried once more. "So, as I was saying, I recently got a promotion at work that—" "Girls, look at me when I'm talking to you." Jessica suddenly snapped at her daughters, who had been absorbed in their games. Both jumped slightly and looked up. "Tell Grandma about the horseback riding lessons you started." And again, the conversation shifted away from me before I could even complete a thought. This had been the pattern my entire life, my existence peripheral to the main story of my family, which starred Jessica, and now her daughters, with my mother as their biggest fan. I was just an extra, useful for financial support but otherwise unnecessary to the plot. A server from another section walked by with a tray of desserts, and both Lily and Zoe's eyes widened. "Can we get dessert now?" Lily asked, the first words she'd spoken directly all evening. "Dinner hasn't even come yet," Jessica replied. "You need to eat your meal first." "But I'm hungry now," Zoe whined, putting down her iPad for the first time. "You should have eaten before we left the house," Jessica said dismissively. "I saw an opportunity to connect with my nieces. Are you guys hungry? The bread basket should be coming soon." Lily nodded eagerly. "I didn't like the sandwich Mom made us." Jessica shot her daughter a warning look. "The sandwich was fine. You're just being picky again." The bread basket arrived a few minutes later, and both girls reached for it immediately. Jessica slapped Zoe's hand lightly. "Ladies don't grab. Wait to be offered." Zoe pulled her hand back, lower lip trembling. I reached for the basket and offered it to the girls. "Here you go. Try the olive bread, it looks delicious." My mother frowned at me. "Jessica is trying to teach the girls manners, Daniel. Don't undermine her." "I'm not undermining anyone," I said, keeping my voice level. "They said they were hungry." "You've never had children," Jessica said with a condescending smile. "You don't understand the importance of consistent boundaries." I wanted to point out that her boundaries seemed to apply only when convenient for her, not when the girls were disrupting an entire restaurant with their tablet noise, but I swallowed the comment. "Keep the peace," I told myself. It's just one dinner. The memory of a childhood incident suddenly flashed through my mind. Jessica breaking our mother's favorite vase while running through the house, then tearfully blaming me. My mother had grounded me for 2 weeks without even asking for my side of the story. When I protested my innocence, she'd added another week for lying. It was a small injustice in the grand scheme of things, but it was emblematic of our entire family dynamic. The waiter returned with our appetizers, a seafood platter for the table that Thomas had ordered without consulting anyone. As he distributed small plates, he asked if everything was to our satisfaction. "These children are being very disruptive," came a voice from the next table. The elderly gentleman I'd noticed earlier was glaring at our table. "Some of us are trying to have a peaceful evening." Before I could respond diplomatically, Thomas puffed up with indignation. "Mind your own business, old man. They're kids, for Christ's sake." The situation was escalating quickly. I opened my mouth to smooth things over, but my mother spoke first. "Daniel, can't you say something to that man? He's ruining my birthday dinner." Of course, it was somehow my responsibility to fix this, despite the fact that I'd been the only one to suggest the twins lower their volume in the first place. I turned to the man and said quietly, "I apologize for the disruption, sir. We'll try to keep it down." "Don't apologize to him," Jessica hissed. "My girls have every right to be here." The tension at the table was becoming unbearable, and we hadn't even gotten our main courses yet. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts and regain my composure. In the elegant bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. When had I become this person? Someone who would sit silently while being disrespected and dismissed by his own family. When had I decided that keeping the peace was worth the sacrifice of my self-respect? And most importantly, when would it ever end if I didn't find the courage to change it? I splashed cold water on my face and took a deep breath. Maybe it was time to stop playing the role I'd been assigned in this family drama. Maybe it was time to rewrite the script. With that thought, I returned to the table, where our main courses had just been served, and where the next act of our family's long-running dysfunction was about to play out. I returned to the table to find our main courses being served with theatrical flourish. The waiter presented each dish with a detailed description of its preparation, though no one at my table except me seemed to be listening. My mother and Jessica were engrossed in conversation about a neighbor's divorce, while Thomas checked emails on his phone. The twins had abandoned their iPads momentarily to stare at the elaborate food placed before them. My salmon looked perfect, crispy skin, medium rare inside, with a delicate herb crust. I took a bite, and it was indeed excellent, the kind of meal that justified the exorbitant price. Thomas cut into his steak with excessive force, as if asserting dominance over a dead cow. My mother and Jessica delicately tasted their dishes, making appreciative noises. The twins, however, were less impressed with their $65 pasta. "This looks gross," Lily announced, poking at a shaving of black truffle with her fork. "What are these black things?" Zoe asked, wrinkling her nose. "Those are truffles," Jessica explained with forced patience. "They're very expensive and fancy. People with sophisticated palates love them." Zoe pushed her plate away. "It smells weird. I don't want it." "Me neither," Lily agreed, crossing her arms. Jessica's face flushed with embarrassment. "Girls, we talked about trying new foods. Just take 3 bites before you decide you don't like it." "I'm not eating it," Zoe declared, her voice rising dangerously toward tantrum level. "I want chicken fingers." Thomas didn't even look up from his phone. "Jessica, handle this." My mother jumped in with her standard excuse. "They're probably just tired. It's been a long day for them." I noticed other diners glancing our way again, their expressions a mix of annoyance and pity. The elegant ambiance of the restaurant was increasingly at odds with our table's tension. "I could share some of my salmon with them," I offered. "It's really good, and not too strong flavored." "They need to eat what they ordered," Jessica insisted, though it had been her who ordered for them without consultation. "I'm hungry," Lily complained, her lower lip trembling. "Me too," Zoe added. I felt genuinely bad for them. Whatever their parents' failings in raising them, they were still just kids who were hungry at a restaurant with food they didn't want to eat. This was when it happened, the moment that would finally break the pattern of a lifetime. Girls, your kids can eat when they get home, my mother said dismissively, tossing them napkins as their untouched pasta and dessert boxes sat before them. There wasn't even an attempt to mask the indifference in her voice. Thomas looked up from his phone long enough to laugh. Should have fed them first, I guess. I stared at my mother, then at Jessica and Thomas, unable to believe what I was hearing. These were the same people who had indulged the twins' every whim since birth, who had never said no to anything they wanted, suddenly unbothered by their hunger, because it was inconvenient to the adults' dining experience. Copy that, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, as something shifted inside me. A lifetime of accumulated injustices and double standards crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. The waiter approached our table. Is everything to your satisfaction? He asked, eyeing the twins' untouched plates with concern. I looked at my niece's disappointed faces, at my sister's irritation, at my mother's indifference, at Thomas's smug disinterest. I thought about every time I had swallowed my feelings to keep the peace, every time I had accepted being treated as less than, every time I had paid, literally and figuratively, for the privilege of being ignored by my own family. And then I stood up. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I'd like to order something else for my nieces. They don't care for the truffle pasta. The waiter nodded, seeming relieved. Of course, sir. What would they prefer? Before Jessica could interject, I asked the girls directly, what would you like to eat? They can make you almost anything. Their eyes widened with surprise at being consulted. Lily spoke first. Could I have spaghetti with butter? And maybe some broccoli? Of course, I said, then looked at Zoe. Chicken? She asked tentatively. Like chicken fingers? The waiter smiled. We have an excellent herb-roasted chicken breast. I can ask the chef to prepare it simply, cut into strips. Would that work? Zoe nodded eagerly. Wonderful, I said. And could we get those started right away? The girls are quite hungry. Daniel! Jessica hissed across the table. What do you think you're doing? I'm making sure my nieces don't go hungry, I replied calmly. Cancel that order, Jessica told the waiter. The girls will eat their pasta or wait until we get home. The waiter hesitated, caught in the family crossfire. I reached for my wallet and handed him my credit card. Please process the new order and bring the children's meals as soon as they're ready. My mother's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Daniel, she whispered harshly, you're embarrassing us. Stop this right now. Thomas puffed up, ready to assert his authority. You don't get to override our parenting decisions. Those are our kids. I turned to face him directly. Yes, they are your kids. Your kids who are sitting here hungry while you check emails and laugh about not feeding them. The twins were watching this exchange with wide eyes, unused to seeing adults in conflict, especially over their well-being. Sir? The waiter asked uncertainly, my credit card still in his hand. Please place the order, I said firmly. And when you have a moment, I'd like to speak with the manager about adding a special dessert for my mother's birthday. Jessica looked ready to explode, but with other diners now openly watching our table, she kept her voice low. You have no right. No right at all. I have every right to make sure children don't go hungry when I can do something about it, I replied, still keeping my voice even. Just like I had every right to expect equal treatment growing up. Just like I have the right to be acknowledged at a dinner I'm paying for. Is this what this is about? My mother demanded. Money? You've always been so materialistic, Daniel. The irony of this statement from a woman who had favored her daughter for marrying wealth was not lost on me. For the first time, instead of swallowing the injustice, I addressed it directly. This isn't about money, Mom. It's about respect. It's about treating people fairly. It's about 30 years of being the family afterthought, while you and Jessica take and take without ever giving back. That's not true, Jessica protested. Isn't it? I asked quietly. When was the last time either of you asked about my life, my work, my happiness? When was the last time you treated me with the same consideration you expect for yourselves? A man in a suit approached our table, the restaurant manager, judging by his demeanor. Is everything all right here? He asked diplomatically. I nodded. Yes, thank you. There was a misunderstanding about my niece's meals. We've sorted it out now. They'll be having the chicken and the buttered pasta instead of the truffle pasta. The manager nodded, clearly relieved the situation wasn't escalating further. Of course, sir. We'll have those out right away. My mother stood up abruptly. I think we should leave. This dinner is ruined. If that's what you want, I said calmly. The bill is already covered, but the girls haven't eaten yet, and you haven't had your birthday dessert. I don't want dessert, she snapped. I want my son to stop making a scene. I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm finally speaking up after a lifetime of staying silent. Thomas stood as well, looming over the table in what I assumed was meant to be an intimidating posture. Let's go, Jessica. Bring the girls. Lily looked at her half-full water glass, then at me. But Uncle Daniel ordered us food. And I'm still hungry, Zoe added softly. Jessica was caught in an impossible position of her own making. To leave and admit she was willing to take her hungry children home to prove a point, or stay and concede that I had been right to intervene. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll wait for their food. But this conversation isn't over, Daniel. No, I agreed as everyone slowly sat back down. I don't think it is. The silence that descended on our table was heavier than any I could remember. But for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of family obligation lifting from my shoulders, replaced by the unfamiliar but welcome sensation of standing up for what was right, even if it meant disrupting the careful fiction of family harmony we'd maintained for so long. When the waiter returned minutes later with simple plates of food for the twins, their faces lit up. Thank you, Uncle Daniel, Lily said, picking up her fork. You're welcome, I replied, ignoring the daggers being stared at me from the adult members of my family. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives aren't marked by celebration, but by the quiet dignity of finally saying enough. The twins ate their new meals with obvious enjoyment, oblivious to the charged atmosphere around them. My mother stabbed at her prime rib with unnecessary force. Jessica pushed food around her plate without eating. Thomas drained his bourbon and signaled for another. I continued eating my salmon, determined not to let the tension ruin an excellent meal. The restaurant manager approached again, this time with a small cake adorned with a single candle. I understand we're celebrating a special birthday, he said smoothly, placing it in front of my mother. Compliments of the house. My mother's expression was a complex mixture of emotions, anger at me warring with her desire to be celebrated. Thank you, she managed. Happy birthday, Mom, I said sincerely. She didn't respond, merely nodded tightly at the manager. Once he had departed, Jessica leaned across the table toward me, her voice low but intense. I don't know what kind of power trip you're on, Daniel, but undermining our parenting decisions in public is completely unacceptable. I wasn't undermining your parenting, I replied calmly. I was feeding hungry children. There's a difference. You had no right, she began, but I cut her off. Let's talk about rights, Jessica. Do you have the right to treat me like a walking ATM while excluding me from every conversation? Does Mom have the right to dismiss everything I say while hanging on every word from you and Thomas? Does Thomas have the right to make condescending comments about my career when my annual bonus is probably more than he makes in a year? Thomas's face darkened. Now, wait just a minute. No, you wait, I said, my voice still controlled but firm. For 32 years I've been waiting to be treated with the same respect and consideration that seems to come automatically to everyone else in this family. And I'm done waiting. My mother put down her fork with a clatter. Is that what this childish display is about? You're jealous of your sister? I looked at her directly. This isn't about jealousy, Mom. It's about fairness. It's about acknowledging that you've treated us differently our entire lives, and how much that's hurt me. That's ridiculous, she scoffed. I've always treated you both exactly the same. I couldn't help but laugh. A short, disbelieving sound. Mom, you paid for Jessica's college, but not mine. You babysit the twins whenever Jessica asks. But when I needed you to drive me to the hospital for surgery 3 years ago, you were too busy because Jessica had a spa day scheduled. You call Jessica 3 times a week but only speak to me when I call you. How is any of that exactly the same? My mother had the grace to look momentarily discomfited, but Jessica jumped in. That's different. I needed help with college. I need help with the girls. You've always been so independent." "I was independent because I had to be," I said. "No one was going to do things for me the way they did for you. No one was going to make my path easier." "Poor Daniel," Jessica said sarcastically. "So successful and yet so misunderstood." "Yes, I am successful," I acknowledged. "But that success came in spite of the family dynamics, not because of them. And my success doesn't mean the inequality doesn't hurt." Thomas, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Look, this is all very touching, but it's ancient history. What's your point?" I looked at each of them in turn. "My point is that I'm no longer willing to be the family doormat. I'm no longer willing to pay, literally and figuratively, for the privilege of being ignored and disrespected." "So what are you saying?" my mother asked, a note of concern finally creeping into her voice. "You're abandoning your family?" I shook my head. "No, Mom. I'm setting boundaries with my family. There's a difference. I'm saying that going forward, I expect to be treated with the same respect I show all of you. I expect my thoughts and feelings to be considered. I expect my contributions, financial and otherwise, to be acknowledged rather than assumed." "And if we don't meet these demands?" Jessica asked coldly. "They're not demands, they're boundaries," I corrected her. "And if they're not respected, then I'll need to limit my interaction with the family to protect my own well-being." "That's emotional blackmail," she accused. "No, Jessica. Emotional blackmail is what Mom did when she told me I didn't love her enough because I couldn't afford to buy her the same expensive Christmas gift you did, despite the fact that I was working 2 jobs to pay my way through college at the time." My mother had the decency to flush at this reminder. The twins had finished their meals and were looking uncertainly between the adults, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Can we have dessert now?" Zoe asked tentatively. Before Jessica or my mother could respond, I smiled at my niece. "Absolutely. The chocolate lava cake here is amazing. Would you like to try that?" Both girls nodded eagerly. I signaled the waiter. 2 chocolate lava cakes for my nieces, please." Jessica didn't object this time, perhaps recognizing the optics of denying her children dessert after the earlier confrontation. Instead, she turned her attack in a different direction. "You've always been so self-righteous, Daniel. Acting like you're better than us because you work in tech and make important decisions. But you know what? At least I have a family who loves me. What do you have? A fancy job title and an empty house." It was a low blow, targeting my single status, but not unexpected. Jessica had always found my vulnerabilities with unerring accuracy. "I have self-respect," I replied quietly, "and people in my life who value me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. That's worth more than you might think." The waiter returned with desserts for the twins, who dug in with enthusiasm, momentarily lightening the heavy atmosphere at the table. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically silent for several minutes, finally spoke. "I don't understand why you're doing this, Daniel. Why ruin my birthday dinner with all this drama?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw not just my mother but a woman who had made choices, some good, some bad, shaped by her own experiences and limitations. "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Mom. But after 32 years of swallowing my feelings to keep the peace, I finally reached my breaking point. And maybe that's actually a gift, the gift of honesty. Because continuing as we have been isn't working, at least not for me." "So this is all about you," she said dismissively. "Partly, yes," I admitted. "But it's also about us, about what kind of family we want to be. One that's built on genuine connection and mutual respect, or one that's built on obligation and resentment." Thomas checked his watch conspicuously. "Well, this has been fascinating, but I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Of course you do," I said, unable to keep a touch of sarcasm from my voice. "Don't worry about the bill. It's covered." "At least you're good for something," he muttered, just loudly enough for me to hear. I let the comment pass, recognizing it for the desperate attempt to reassert control that it was. Thomas's only real power in this family came from his money, and he just realized that my financial independence meant he had no leverage over me. As the twins finished their desserts, Jessica began gathering their things. "Girls, wipe your mouths. We're leaving." "But Grandma hasn't blown out her candle," Lily protested, pointing to the untouched birthday cake. My mother glanced at the cake, then at me. Something unspoken passed between us. A recognition, perhaps, that this birthday marked more than just another year. It marked the end of a family dynamic that had persisted for decades. "I don't feel much like celebrating anymore," she said quietly. I signaled for the check, which the waiter brought promptly along with a box for the untouched cake. The total came to just over $800, including the wine and Thomas's expensive bourbon. I added a generous tip and signed without comment. As we all stood to leave, I reached out and lightly touched my mother's arm. "Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you know that despite everything, I do love you." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she simply nodded and turned away, following Jessica and Thomas toward the exit. The twins lingered briefly. "Thank you for the food, Uncle Daniel," Zoe said shyly. "And the dessert," Lily added. "You're welcome," I replied, smiling at them. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." Then they too were gone, hurrying to catch up with their parents, leaving me alone at the table where a family confrontation years in the making had finally played out. I gathered my mother's unopened gift and the boxed cake, feeling strangely light despite the emotional intensity of the evening. Something had shifted, irrevocably, and though I wasn't sure exactly what would come next, I knew that I would never again silently accept the role of family doormat. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is simply to stand up and say, "Enough." The valet brought my car around, and I tipped him generously, partly out of habit, and partly because someone should end this evening better off than they started. I placed the boxed cake and my mother's still unopened gift on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel for a moment, collecting my thoughts. Through the windshield, I could see my family grouped on the sidewalk about 20 yards away. They were engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion, with Jessica gesticulating emphatically while my mother nodded. Thomas stood slightly apart, scrolling through his phone as usual. The twins hovered at the periphery, their earlier excitement from the dessert now subdued by the adult tension surrounding them. I had two choices: drive away and let the evening end as it was, or attempt one final conversation. Despite everything, these people were my family. The thought of leaving like this, with so much raw emotion exposed but unresolved, felt wrong. With a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked toward them. Their conversation halted abruptly as I approached. "I thought you'd left," my mother said, her tone clipped. "I was about to," I replied, "but it didn't feel right to end the evening this way." Jessica crossed her arms defensively. "What way would you prefer? With more accusations and self-pity?" I shook my head. "No. With clarity about where we go from here." "That's easy," Thomas interjected, finally looking up from his phone. "You stay in your lane, and we'll stay in ours." "And what lane is that, Thomas?" I asked calmly. "The one where I pay for expensive dinners but don't get to speak? The one where I'm expected to provide financial support but receive no emotional support in return?" "No one's forcing you to pay for anything," he retorted, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. The expectation had been set long ago that my role was provider, not participant. "This isn't just about money," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "It's about respect." Jessica stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "You completely undermined my parenting in there. You made me look like the bad guy for not letting my children eat whatever they wanted. How is that respectful? Your children were hungry, Jessica. They didn't ask for caviar or lobster, just simple food they could eat. What kind of mother denies her hungry children food that's readily available, just to make a point about authority?" "Don't you dare question my mothering," she hissed. "You have no idea what it takes to raise children." "You're right, I don't," I conceded. "But I know what it feels like to be a child whose needs come second to an adult's pride. I know what it's like to go hungry because someone else is making a point." My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "That's not fair, Daniel. We never let you go hungry." I turned to her. "Maybe not physically hungry, Mom, but emotionally? Absolutely. Every time you praised Jessica but ignored my achievements. Every time you made excuses for her failures but expected perfection from me. Every time you gave her what she hadn't earned but made me work for what should have been freely given. Your love and support. I've always loved you both equally, she insisted, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Love isn't just a feeling, Mom. It's actions. It's choices. And your choices have consistently favored Jessica over me for as long as I can remember. The twins had wandered a few steps away, pretending to be fascinated by a decorative planter, but I could tell they were listening to every word. Jessica noticed too. "Girls, go wait by the car," she commanded. Once they had reluctantly moved out of earshot, she turned back to me. "You know what your problem is, Daniel? You can't stand that despite all your money and success, you're still alone. No wife, no kids, just your fancy job and your big empty house. So you're trying to buy my children's affection to fill the void in your sad little life." It was a deliberately cruel statement, designed to wound me where I was most vulnerable. In the past, I might have absorbed the blow silently, letting it add to the internal scar tissue I'd accumulated over years of similar attacks. But something had changed tonight. "That's not what's happening, Jessica, and I think you know it," I said quietly. "I love Lily and Zoe because they're my nieces, not because I'm trying to fill some void. And yes, I'm single, but that doesn't make my life sad or empty. I have friends who value me. I have work that fulfills me. And most importantly, I have the self-respect to walk away from relationships that diminish rather than enhance my life." Thomas stepped forward, physically inserting himself between Jessica and me. "I think we're done here. And just so we're clear, after tonight's little performance, you can forget about seeing the girls anytime soon." I looked past him to where my nieces stood by their car, watching us with concerned expressions. Is that really what's best for them? Cutting off their relationship with their uncle because their parents' pride was hurt? "Don't pretend this is about the girls," he scoffed. "This is about you trying to play the hero." I shook my head. "No, Thomas. This is about me finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of being treated as less than. And if part of that means making sure my nieces know they have an uncle who cares about them, who will make sure they don't go hungry even when it's inconvenient for the adults around them, then yes, I'll gladly play that role." My mother, who had been watching this exchange with a pinched expression, finally intervened. "That's enough, both of you. This is still my birthday, and I won't have it completely ruined by this nonsense." I turned to her, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. Decades of emotional labor, of swallowing hurt and making excuses for being treated as an afterthought, had taken their toll. "You're right, Mom. It is your birthday, and I genuinely wanted it to be special. That's why I made the reservation, why I arranged for the flowers, why I found a gift I thought would mean something to you." I gestured to her still unopened present, visible through my car window. "But I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that it doesn't hurt when you treat me like I don't matter." For a brief moment, something flickered across my mother's face. Recognition, perhaps, or regret. But it was quickly replaced by the defensive anger I was more familiar with. "If that's how you feel, maybe it's better if we take some time apart," she said stiffly. "Maybe it is," I agreed, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. "I love you, Mom. I always will. But I need to love myself too, and that means not accepting treatment that diminishes me." Jessica made a derisive sound. So dramatic. "Always have to make everything about you." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the confident, superior person she projected, but someone deeply insecure, someone who needed to diminish others to feel adequate herself. In that moment, I felt a surprising wave of compassion for her. "I hope someday we can have a relationship based on mutual respect, Jessica. I really do. Until then, I wish you and your family well." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back to my car. As I opened the door, I heard the patter of small feet behind me. "Uncle Daniel?" I turned to find Lily standing there, slightly out of breath from running. Before I could respond, she threw her arms around my waist in a tight hug. "Thank you for the cake," she whispered, "and for making sure we got dinner." I hugged her back, careful not to let her see the sudden moisture in my eyes. "You're welcome, sweetheart. That's what uncles are for. Lily, get back here right now. Jessica's sharp voice cut through the moment. Lily pulled away reluctantly. I have to go. I know, I said, crouching down to her level. But remember, you can always call me if you need anything. Anything at all. She nodded solemnly, then turned and ran back to her waiting parents. I watched as they loaded the twins into their luxury SUV and drove away without a backward glance. My mother remained on the sidewalk, a solitary figure under the restaurant's elegant portico lighting. Our eyes met briefly across the parking lot, and I raised my hand in a small wave. After a moment's hesitation, she returned the gesture, a minimal acknowledgement, but more than I had expected. Then she too turned away, walking toward her car with the slightly stooped posture that had become more pronounced in recent years, a physical reminder of the passage of time that tonight's confrontation had brought into sharp relief. I got into my car and sat for a moment in the quiet darkness, exhaling deeply as the events of the evening washed over me. The dinner had cost me $800 and possibly my relationship with my family. As I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, I wasn't sure if I had lost everything or finally found myself. Driving through the familiar streets toward my empty house, I felt an unexpected sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in my life, I had spoken my truth without apology or compromise. Whatever came next, I would face it as a person who had found the courage to stand up for himself, to demand the respect he deserved. Some prices are worth paying, and some losses are actually gains in disguise. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized that tonight's confrontation had given me something no amount of family approval ever could, the knowledge that I was finally free from the need to seek it. 3 months passed in a strange, suspended silence. No calls from my mother, no texts from Jessica, no invitations to family gatherings. The vintage brooch I had so carefully selected for my mother's birthday remained in its velvet box on my mantel, a tangible reminder of a relationship in limbo. At first, the silence was deafening. I would find myself reaching for my phone to call my mother, a lifetime habit of seeking reconciliation not easily broken. But each time, I stopped myself, remembering the look on her face in the restaurant parking lot, not anger or hurt, but something more troubling, indifference. The first week was the hardest. I questioned my actions constantly. Had I been too harsh, too selfish, too dramatic, as Jessica had accused? I replayed the dinner conversation in my mind, examining it from every angle, searching for the point where I could have steered things differently. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. The fog of family obligation began to lift, revealing a landscape of possibilities I had never fully seen before. Without the constant drain of one-sided relationships, I found myself with emotional energy to invest elsewhere. I joined a local hiking group and discovered the meditative peace of mountain trails at dawn. I accepted dinner invitations from colleagues I'd previously kept at arm's length, finding unexpected connection in shared interests beyond work. I volunteered at a youth coding program, teaching kids from disadvantaged backgrounds the skills that had given me my own path to success. And I started therapy, something I'd considered for years but always dismissed as unnecessary. Dr. Patrice, a compassionate woman with keen insights, helped me understand that the patterns in my family weren't my fault, but they also weren't my burden to fix. Families are systems, she explained during one particularly illuminating session. When one part of the system tries to change, the other parts will resist, often fiercely. That doesn't mean change is impossible, just that it requires everyone's participation. And if they're not willing to participate? I asked. Then you have choices to make about what kind of relationship is possible under those constraints, she said gently, and what boundaries you need to protect your own well-being. These conversations were challenging but clarifying. I began to understand that my worth wasn't determined by my family's ability to see it, that their treatment of me reflected their limitations, not mine. That love without respect is ultimately unsustainable. 6 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I received an unexpected text message, not from my mother or Jessica, but from Lily. Hi, Uncle Daniel. This is Lily. I'm using Mom's old phone to text you. Thank you for standing up for us at dinner. Mom and Dad were mad, but Zoe and I thought you were brave. Miss you." I stared at the message for a long time, a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. Pride that my niece had recognized the difference between authority and courage. Concern that she felt the need to contact me in secret. Hope that the bonds of family might be more resilient than I had feared. I replied carefully, "Hi, Lily. I miss you and Zoe too. I'm sorry things are difficult right now between the grown-ups in our family. But I want you to know that no matter what, I love you both, and I'm always here for you. Be good to your parents, even when it's hard. And remember that sometimes people who love each other need time to figure things out." She sent back a simple heart emoji, and though I waited, there were no further messages. I hoped she understood that I was trying to support her without undermining her parents, walking the delicate line between maintaining my own boundaries and avoiding putting her in the middle of adult conflicts. At the 2-month mark, I decided to send my mother a brief, non-confrontational email. "Mom, I hope you're doing well. I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. If you'd like to talk sometime, I'm open to that. Love, Daniel." No response came, and I told myself I was okay with that. Healing couldn't be rushed, for any of us. Then, 3 months to the day after the restaurant confrontation, I was pushing a cart through the produce section of Whole Foods when I heard a familiar voice. "Daniel?" I turned to find my mother, standing by the organic apples, a shopping basket over her arm, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. "Mom," I said, surprised but composed. "How are you?" "I'm fine," she replied, her eyes darting from my face to her basket and back again. "Your hair is different." I ran a hand through my hair, which I'd recently cut shorter than I'd worn it in years. "Yeah, thought I'd try something new." An awkward silence fell between us, filled with the mundane sounds of the grocery store, the misting system over the vegetables, the distant beep of checkout scanners, the low murmur of other shoppers. "I got your email," she finally said. I wasn't sure, I admitted. I didn't know how to respond. She adjusted her grip on the shopping basket. "I'm not good at talking about difficult things." "I know, Mom." Another silence, but less strained this time. "Jessica says you're trying to turn the girls against her," my mother said abruptly. I sighed. "I've had exactly one communication with the girls since the dinner, Mom. A text from Lily that I responded to respectfully, encouraging her to be good to her parents. That's it." She nodded slightly. "Perhaps accepting this, perhaps not. Thomas wants to cut you off completely. That's his prerogative," I said calmly. "But it would be a shame for the girls." "Yes," she agreed unexpectedly. "It would." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. "Your birthday is next month." The statement surprised me. My birthdays had rarely been acknowledged with more than a perfunctory call in recent years. "Yes, it is," I confirmed. "I was thinking maybe we could have lunch, just the two of us." I studied her face, looking for the hidden agenda, the string attached to this olive branch. But all I saw was an aging woman trying, in her limited way, to reach across a divide she had helped create but didn't fully understand how to bridge. "I'd like that," I said simply. Relief flickered across her features. "Good. That's good." As she turned to go, I remembered something. "Mom, wait." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my house key ring, quickly removing a small key from it. "I still have your birthday present at my place. This is a spare key to my house. You can stop by any time to pick it up if you want. I leave for work around 8 and usually get home around 6. She took the key, holding it like it was something fragile. "Thank you." "You're welcome," I replied. We parted then, each returning to our separate shopping, our separate lives. But something had shifted. A door cracked open just enough to let in a thin line of light. That night, I called Dr. Patrice and told her about the encounter. "It's a start," she said. "Remember, reconciliation doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means creating something new that works better for everyone." "And if that's not possible?" I asked. "Then you continue building a life that honors your worth, with or without their participation," she replied. "But give them the chance to be part of the new story, if they're willing to try. Over the next few weeks, small changes accumulated. My mother used the key I'd given her, coming by when I wasn't home to collect her birthday gift. She left a note thanking me for the brooch, saying it reminded her of happy times with her grandmother. Jessica didn't reach out directly, but Lily and Zoe sent me drawings in the mail, their mother's tacit acknowledgement of our connection, even if she wasn't ready to engage personally. I continued building my own community beyond family, deepening friendships, exploring new interests, establishing myself as someone defined by more than his family role or professional success. I dated a bit, nothing serious yet, but open to the possibility of partnership with someone who could see and value the authentic me. The lunch with my mother on my birthday was neither a breakthrough nor a disaster. We kept the conversation light, avoiding the deeper issues that still lay between us. But when the check came, she insisted on paying, a small gesture that nonetheless acknowledged my years of financial contribution to family gatherings. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me as we waited for her credit card to be processed, "about actions showing love, not just feelings." I nodded but didn't speak, giving her space to continue. "I might not always get it right," she said hesitantly. "I'm set in my ways, but I'm trying to see things differently." It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. True healing, I've learned, isn't linear. It comes in fits and starts, in small moments of recognition and tentative steps toward change. Some days I still feel the sting of old hurts. Other days I'm amazed at how far I've come. What happened at that birthday dinner 3 months ago didn't instantly transform my family, but it transformed me. It taught me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That healthy relationships require mutual respect and boundaries. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say, "This isn't working for me." I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my mother and sister. We're in uncharted territory now, slowly finding our way towards something that might be healthier, or might simply be more limited. Either way, I'm at peace with my part in the story. The part where I finally found the courage to stop accepting less than I deserved. Sometimes families break and reform into something different but stronger. Sometimes the cracks remain, a visible reminder of what happened but no longer threatening the foundation. And sometimes, the act of standing up for yourself is its own reward, regardless of how others respond. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted? How did you find the courage to say enough is enough? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice and setting boundaries. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it, but having the courage to stand up for that worth can change everything. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.